regional and international bodies to address digital rights issues in Africa. Our aim is to promote Afrocentric solutions gathered through discourse, research, and more research. Now, in order to ensure that Africa is not left behind when it comes to protection and guarantee of fundamental rights in the digital age, they have focuses on the building of the needed capacity, as well as to develop and facilitate an African-led research into digital rights issues, including privacy and data protection, in order to help adopt solutions, both policy and legal, that are best suited to our peculiar problems here in Africa. As you know, Africa has always been a conundrum. In fact, Korokwa referred to it as an anomaly of poverty within wealth. And if you are going to break through this, one of the areas you have to focus on is on digital rights and their protection. The importance of privacy and data protection today goes without saying that data is invaluable, data is fuel. There are also skills and opportunities for accessing various kinds of data, including personal data, which continues to evolve very, very rapidly. Unauthorized, unlawful, insensitive, or ignorant processing of personal data poses significant dangers to individual, corporate bodies, and even governments. This year's summit is under the theme Building Bridges for Oversight and Accountability. Key areas of focus today and tomorrow will include generative AI, artificial intelligence, data transfers across Africa, data protection, ID systems in Africa, as well as digital trade, data protection, especially within the now African Continental Free Trade Agreement system. This summit will explore relevant issues on data protection and privacy in Africa, taking into consideration the current ecosystem and measures to be taken to address the risks of violation. Today, we have brought together data controllers, processors, tech companies, policymakers, regulators, innovators, business communities, and experts and individuals to discuss and bring out and proffer solutions to the engaging issues on data protection, data privacy in Africa. Over the course of this summit, we shall have an opportunity to learn, share, network, and proffer solutions that will grow this continent from some of the best in the area of privacy and data protection in the world and on our continent. Let us therefore, as we gather here today and tomorrow, take advantage of this opportunity and to make the most of the opportunity. Permit me to thank you once again for coming here. And we have the Executive Council of the African Digital Rights Hub. We warmly welcome you to Accra to the 2023 Data Protection Africa Summit. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mbra. Another round of applause for Ambassador Quincy, please. As has been the practice for the Data Protection Africa Summit, we ensure that as much as possible we have representation for many tongues. So if you are French speaking or Francophone and would like translation, just put your hand up and we'll get a receiver over to you immediately to make sure that you follow the proceedings. And if you need to use the restroom when you exit the hall, you make a left just literally opposite the tent. And I will also remind us all to put our phones on silent. We will now hear from our special guest of honor. Justice Jennifer Abinadazi is a Justice of the Court of Appeal of Ghana with international professional training and experience in the jurisdiction of Ghana and the United States of America. She holds a Master of Laws degree in International Business Law from the American University, Washington College of Law. Justice Dazi is also a member of several professional associations, including the Ghana Bar Association, the New York Bar, the Washington, D.C. Bar, holding training certificates in international information technology training from Serbia and commercial arbitration in Ghana. Still joining the bench, apart from her impressive performance in adjudicating significant cases, Justice Dazi has been involved in the work of a number of committees which aim at enhancing justice delivery in Ghana through the deployment of ICT tools and software processes, notable amongst which is the Technical Working Group of the E-Justice and Virtual Courts Committee, of which she is the current chairperson. Justice Dazi is also a member of the faculties of the Ghana School of Law and the Judicial Training Institute of Ghana, contributing significantly to the training of law students, some of whom are amongst us, judges and magistrates, the judicial service staff, and staff of other governmental agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, with a resounding round of applause, help me welcome our keynote special guest of honor, Justice Jennifer Abinadazi.
Good morning. The Executive Council of African Digital Rights Hub, the Advisory 2021, it is pertinent to explore mechanisms that ensure, where necessary, the safe and fair movement of data beyond our boundaries for sustainable socio-economic development. While we acknowledge the challenges, we must also celebrate the progress made in data protection oversight and accountability in African countries. Ghana, for instance, has taken significant strides in this regard. Our nation has enacted comprehensive legislation, established an independent data protection authority, and fostered a culture of transparency and accountability. These success stories serve as beacons of hope and inspiration for others. Technology and innovation play a pivotal role in strengthening data protection measures. These tools can bolster our efforts to ensure the security and integrity of data. However, our journey towards effective data protection oversight and accountability cannot be undertaken in isolation. African countries must come together, transcend borders, and share best practices. By fostering collaboration and cooperation, we can effectively, collectively address our challenges and build a stronger foundation for data. Of the Republic of Ghana, Gertrude Sakitokunu. I declare the summit open. Thank you very much.
I feel very powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Justice Dazi. We're grateful. Now, next up is a young friend of ours. He is a poet, a man who weaves the spoken word in very intriguing and interesting and inspiring ways. I give you the birthday boy, Nana Asase.
Ago. Welcomes are very expensive. And so mind who you welcome into your home. Mind who you welcome into your consciousness. Mind who you welcome into your reality. But today, I came to offer you a welcome that my clan can afford. We say welcome to you, whichever part of the world you belong to. Welcome to the crossroads of dreams. Welcome to the market of 9 moons where it all began. Where in the beginning the Creator said, let there be light, and there was water. So when we have received visitors, we offer you water. Have you had water? I came to offer you water to wash your feet of all the traveler's dust. And then to wash your feet of all the sins you might have committed. I came to offer you water to wash your brow of the traveler's heat, and then water to quench your thirst, not of water itself, for every traveler is indeed in search of knowledge. I came to offer you water that my clan can afford to give, knowledge at the center of the world. And so whichever language you understand best, your seat was meant for you, and it's no coincidence that you are here. You are welcome in whichever language you speak best, and we are willing to open our arms and our embraces. We are as sure-footed as a warrior who knows what he is able to take and says, let life bring on its best. And so, in whichever language that Ghana could offer, more than 200 and other coins that we could master. Akwaba, welcome. Swahili bienvenue, Ghana. Welcome to Ghana. If I did not mention your language, it's simply because when a child is called before his elders, he dare not name names or call titles, lest he misses one and be made to pay a fine. I did not introduce myself. Pardon me, I am not rude. I am simply a child learning the ropes of the world and the ways of my people. I'm the writer king who sips communion wine from the calabash. Unfortunately, you might not have your cups. And so on all your behalfs, I would like to cut a drink in its essence. For indeed, we came to share a communion of ourselves in knowledge and all the things that we have in holding our world in place. And so, in the cutting of the drink, we offer moments of sober reflection. For indeed, when a matter is urgent, then we cease from all our labors and we sit to deliberate. Otherwise, then we would owe a debt. This debt is communal when it is not paid. When a man is only as true as his mother tongue. Inti asemo ehu hia ni esi hu nkonya ye biesu wo bedwam ni yaka. Yanka ebeye ka eye ka di tutu kan so ene tutu kan me ne wo a yaji adaje ba betina ebi asempa na aba asemo ehu hia yanka ye be ku fie ni ja ato be bia na ye bubuja. And so it's important that whichever language we speak, whichever mindset it is, we should know that we have come into a beautiful mind. A mind which is not starched with gold and all the things that we would like to pack in votes, but we have come to this mind which offers us the best of minds that Africa has to offer. And so, I am the one who will sit on those diagonal junctions in a year from now, wherever you choose to gather. I will come and account for what you put in, and what you put in, and what you put in. And then when the harvest is due, we need not pay the laborers, for it would only be neighbors attending to communal business. For your bumper harvest will be my peace of mind at least for a year. Africa, we are capable of doing all the things they called impossible. We are here, not only to build bridges, but also to build structures they thought was impossible. Those bridges will not look black. Those bridges will define creed and gender and whatever stumbling block there could ever be. It is time to speak the language of the world. It is time to speak the language that statistics and numbers would offer, but I am only a poet. What am I here to deliver to you? Many come before me. Many more come after me, and I simply came to tell you the road ahead is longer than the one we have left behind. Ago, ago, ago. If you forget everything that is shared, remember that you came to the center of the world. You met the writer king who sips communion wine from the calabash, and he left you with a simple word, that you are all the hope that Africa could ever have. Without you, all the bridges and connections we hope to build will come crumbling down. And it is most urgent, and it behoves on us to ensure that we, like the Dinkrahini symbol, keep the cycles of the world going. I choose to wear black on a beautiful day like this because, indeed, we are the continent they chose to call dark, but yet all our beauty shows forth as gold. I carry Akofina on my shoulders because these are the symbols of authority. And so whatever we can influence, be it policy or action, let us remember, if Africa will fail in our time, it is not possible, except God. Jinyami, Intiminia, Michelle, baby out in here. I shall be out of here in a little while, but I will be back. I simply came to foment brotherhood. I simply came to get you thinking. It is okay if my words are heavy. It is simply because my generation and those after me have a heavier dreams, hoping that yours are the able minds and hands that will deliver these into reality. If I have spoken well, even if you think otherwise, I am the writer king who sips communion wine from the calabash. I did not come to pour libation. This is to you and you and you who keep the center in place so that the world can continue to go round. Thank you.
Excellently delivered, Nana Sasi. Thank you very much. And so he happened to have celebrated his birthday yesterday, and he's taking time off his personal honeymoon to join us here. So another round of applause for the young man. Now, we will take a keynote from our very first session, which is on generative AI and data protection in Africa. I will be hearing from the director and founder of Privacy X Consulting, and a man who is also a visiting policy fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. Previously, he was the UK Deputy Information Commissioner and Chair of the OECD Working Party on Data Governance and Privacy. Joining us by the power of technology, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Steve Wood.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody in Accra. And it's a great pleasure to be giving this presentation to you today, and I'm very sad I can't be with you in person. And I had the great pleasure of visiting Accra on 2 occasions in 2014 and 2019, and I always remember very fondly the hospitality I received in Ghana. So I'm very sad that I'm here in cold and wet and rainy London today, and not with you in Ghana. But it's a really interesting time to be speaking to you about this topic of generative AI and data protection, and some observations about how we could consider the topic in the context of Africa. So I've got a brief presentation to speak to you about today. And the first thing I wanted to talk about actually was a bit of a reflection, really, as we reach the end of a very, very busy year for policy discussions about regulation related to generative AI. And it's reasonable to say that this year has seen an explosion in the use of generative AI around the world. Generative AI tools have already been embedded into many people's daily lives, whether that's business, people working in the public sector, children in education. There are so many different applications of generative AI. And like many people, I've sort of oscillated between different feelings about generative AI in terms of its potential to transform our societies, to improve productivity, to improve our approach to challenges in healthcare, in education. So generative AI has huge potential, but also the risks of generative AI. And this video that I've got referenced on the slide here, I'm not going to play it now, but it's a really thought-provoking video that actually uses the term the wonder panic of AI, which I think the terms wonder and panic are often the feelings that I often experience about AI, as I just mentioned, that the task for all of us as data protection professionals is to navigate through the wonder and the panic to find the right guardrails for generative AI, what protections should be in place, how generative AI is set up in terms of its data governance, and how it is regulated in practice. So I recommend this video to you. So I put the link on the slide, and it's a very sort of eye-opening video that also uses AI itself to sort of demonstrate the key challenges we have before us. So just a little sort of opening and something to set the scene before I move into the more detailed points about data protection. So when thinking about generative AI and data protection, I'm firstly going to set the scene and what I would call some of the global challenges, and then think about maybe what those global challenges may look like in the African context. I think the first thing to recognize with generative AI is that data protection and data governance should be a core foundation of AI safety. So globally, particularly in the last 6 months, a lot of the discussions around AI have moved to the topic of AI safety, which is perhaps a much broader topic and is also looking at very, very significant issues in terms of the existential risks posed by AI. But what we need to do is make sure we're still breaking down the key challenges of generative AI. And data protection is a core foundation of AI safety. And because obviously the foundations of generative AI tools are built on data, the practical processes and policies and procedures of data governance are foundational to achieving that particular AI safety goal. So there is a risk really that data protection might be subsumed or replaced by the broader concept of AI safety. So it's very important to recognize why data protection is important, because it's a rights-based framework. It's grounded in human rights. It's linked to the wider human right of privacy. So it's an important framework for AI safety because it's rights-based. The data protection principles that are common in most data protection laws around the world, so principles such as fairness and data minimization, for example, and they're embodied in global conventions like the OECD's principles. Those data protection principles can therefore provide the guiding part of the governance framework needed for generative AI. Data protection laws as well also provide an approach in terms of risk assessment and finding mitigations using data protection by design and privacy enhancing technologies. And also data protection has links with other ethical challenges. So we think about the issues of data minimization. That also can link to the wider challenge that we have about the energy use of generative AI in terms of how we can factor that challenge in terms of the challenge of climate change as well. And obviously reducing the amount of data potentially that you have in an AI model in terms of applying the principle of data minimization may also have environmental benefits as well. So that's really just to set the scene. Why is data protection important to generative AI? Then the next slide I have for you here really sets out all of the different points of consideration at a relatively high level of where personal data may flow through a generative AI ecosystem. So the key point here is we just don't have one point of risk. We have many different points of risk and many different actors with different responsibilities in the generative AI ecosystem. So if we look on the side, on the two sides of this diagram, we have all of the different data points that feed in to provide the training data for generative AI models. So the large language models, the foundation models that actually sit at the core of a generative AI system. And this will include a lot of publicly available personal data. It may be data that's scraped from social media, from other websites. It will be data that comes from databases. It will be image data. It could be video data as well as text data. And all of those data sources are likely to contain personal data. So the organizations who hold that data that's actually drawn into the training process for a generative AI system, they have a responsibility in terms of making sure that there's transparency and data protection law is complied with in terms of the use of that data as the starting point in terms of that flowing into the generative AI model. And then also as well, we have a number of different actors. So as well as the organizations who are responsible for providing the training data, we have generative AI developers. So that would include a company such as OpenAI, who provide ChatGPT. They develop an OpenAI tool. We also have generative AI deployers. So a generative AI deployer would be an organization like a bank who decides to integrate the ChatGPT tool into their banking website to provide a chat service for their banking customers. So that generative AI deployer may use additional data to train their data set, which would supplement the publicly available data and other data that's already been fed into the generative AI model. So we have further sets of data protection considerations there. So we have the data protection responsibilities of the developers, and we have the data protection responsibilities of the deployers. And then also in that diagram, we obviously have the central point of our focus with data protection, people. So we have the individual users who may interact with either the deployer system or the developer system. So I may go onto ChatGPT directly and use that tool on their app, or I may use the tool on the bank's website. So the number of different ways that individuals can interact with these tools. And while we're interacting with these tools, they will be providing us with outputs, which may include personal data. So it may include information about individuals. When you ask a chatbot a question related to an individual, that information therefore will include personal data. Also as well, the generative AI systems will be learning from the queries. So that personal data is therefore if there's personal data in the input into the system, so you ask a question about a person or something related to an individual, that prompt that you've used in the generative AI system will then be fed back into the system as well. So there's a lot of learning in terms of how the generative AI system is feeding back that information in terms of how the model is improving. So all of these different points, therefore, lead to a set of questions about what the key data protection risks and challenges are. So I've set out 8 headings on this slide in terms of what the key challenges are. So we have challenges in terms of transparency, accountability, data rights, lawful basis, children, fairness, applying the data protection principles, so particularly principles such as accuracy, and the challenge of security as well. So all of these different issues will need to be broken down and addressed by those different actors in the generative AI ecosystem that I talked about. So particularly, going across these slides, these points on the slide now, we have transparency in terms of different responsibilities, in terms of transparency in terms of the training data, transparency in terms of how that learning happens in terms of the queries, and transparency about the implications of the generative AI system, particularly if it's used in terms of an automated decision-making process. Crucially as well, we have the principles and the concept of accountability and data protection. So all of the different actors must make sure that they are agreeing their role as a controller and a processor and understanding where their liability lies and taking responsibility for their own data governance, applying data protection by design and impact assessments. Then, of course, we have the rights of individual users, which have to be applied depending on what data is held by each actor. So, for example, there's the right of data access. There's also the right of correction or deletion, which actually can be particularly challenging in a generative AI context in terms of how do you actually ask a generative AI model to delete data is actually very complex in terms of the tokenized mechanisms that are actually held within a generative AI model. So the tokens that actually represent the personal data, it's very difficult at the moment to actually remove that representation of an individual that comes out of the generative AI model in terms of applying someone's rights. So what we have at the moment is the concepts of unlearning. So the term unlearning is being developed as a mechanism to be able to get the generative AI model essentially to forget someone. So that, I think, is going to be a very particular important issue in 2024. We also have, of course, the lawful basis that may be needed under data protection law, and there will obviously be a choice in terms of whether it's under legitimate interest, the importance of necessity and proportionality. Is consent required? Consent may not be required in all situations, whether consent is properly informed so that the individual understands how their data will be used in the generative AI system. Or the use of the generative AI system could be necessary for the contract that the individual has with the company who's providing the service. We also have the importance of children as users of generative AI. Children are generally the fastest adopters of new technology. It's already been heavily used in education. So it's very important we actually think about the specific risks related to children, and that there are particular safeguards put in place as well for children, depending on how the generative AI system operates, which in some systems may require age assurance, so that there is a mechanism to actually verify the age of the child. We also have the question of fairness. So ensuring that we reduce the risk of bias, we consider discrimination risks. We consider the risks in terms of fairness, in terms of how the data set is selected. So the fairness of selecting and choosing certain types of data to go into the system. We have the overall design of the system. Is the design fair in the way the individual is prompted and encouraged to provide their personal data into the system? Is the system fair in its outcome? So if there's a decision involved, how do we assess the fairness of that? And therefore, how do we assess the overall implementation fairness? We also have the accuracy of the generative AI system as well. And we know that generative AI systems may often hallucinate, that is to say, essentially fabricate information related to individuals. So again, how do we tackle that challenge of improving the accuracy of generative AI system? How do we ensure that the principle of data minimization is applied as well to training data, given generally generative AI systems have to work at scale. They work best with large data sets, which of course is also important for representation and fairness and reducing bias. So this is going to be a crucial question over time that data protection regulators are going to have to address, and also the principle of purpose limitation as well. Then lastly as well, we have the issues of security, but sometimes personal data will be leaked from a model. So it will reveal more personal data than perhaps is expected about an individual in terms of some of the training data. More data could be revealed than is expected. So we have identification risks. So it may be unexpected that an individual is suddenly identified in the result that comes back when someone has actually asked a question of a generative AI tool. So we have risks such as model inversion, data poisoning, and prompt injection, which essentially are methods that bad actors can use to essentially subvert the data set, to essentially make the generative AI system misperform, and that is a security risk as well. And also generative AI can be used to automate cyber attacks as well. So to move on quickly now to talk about some of the challenges in the African context, I just want to talk about some of the risks and opportunities that I perhaps observed from thinking about generative AI in the last year, and I obviously really look forward to the observations on the panel. So obviously it's really important that we map the specific use cases and potential misuses and the benefits and risks in the African context, because of so many of the leading generative AI tools have been developed in certain countries. Obviously, the US is one of the major providers of generative AI tools. It will obviously be important to understand the use cases in Africa may be different compared to other parts of the world, and therefore we need to make sure we can understand what the benefits and risks are in that African context. Therefore, the importance of risk assessment is really, really key. Therefore, we have a risk that the AI foundation models developed in the global north present potential risks of bias, fairness, and representation in terms of the types of data that have been used to develop and train the generative AI systems that have been developed in the global north. It may present linguistic challenges. There may also be unassessed or misidentified risks. If that assessment is not done in the African context, some of the risk assessment will be done from the perspective of the global north. So how do we ensure that that risk-based approach is actually built in, and we actually have the developers and the deployers, so going back to my previous slide, but the developers and the deployers are taking responsibilities for specifically addressing these risks in an African context. And of course, as well, we may have specific risks in terms of the data sources in Africa that are fed in to train the generative AI system. But there may be particular issues, transparency, and the fairness of use of those data sources in the African context as well. I'm also aware as well, but we need to make sure that we have conceptions of privacy that work in the specific context that we are considering. So how do African conceptions of privacy intersect with generative AI and data protection? So particularly about concepts like group privacy and concepts relating to religion, to make sure those are fed into the overall risk assessment as well. I think it's going to be important as well that we have generative AI data governance models that are developed, either new data governance models for generative AI in Africa, or ones that are adapted so they actually work specifically in the context of the particular risks and challenges in the African data protection context. So it'll be very important that data protection regulators in Africa have that engagement with AI developers and deployers in that African context. I think some of the opportunities are that we can have smaller and more resource efficient multilingual African models, which means we can have the generative AI systems focused on using the data that's really needed to develop a generative AI system that works in Africa. And these can be focused not necessarily on such a wide range of data in terms of how the other generative AI systems have been developed globally, but they can be focused on these particular multilingual African models, and also the data therefore can be minimized and focused on the data that's needed in the African context. There could also be opportunities as well for Africa to utilize open source generative AI models, ensuring that adaptation happens, taking account of the risks that I mentioned earlier. So lastly, I just wanted to put this slide forward, which is actually taken from an academic article from a journal which is called Nature Human Behavior. So I've put the reference to it at the end, which I felt was quite a helpful example of what the research agenda needs to be in terms of generative AI in Africa. So particularly focusing on research that actually takes learning and evidence from current initiatives on the continent to make sure that we're learning from how generative AI is being used in Africa now, what sorts of governance are being used, what governance is working well. So we're not just taking learnings from data governance models in the global north, but we're actually looking at the African context. How can community and end user understandings and experiences actually be fed into the design of the technology so that the African experience of using generative AI and the understanding of the data protection risks are fed in? And then linked to that as well, how do the African publics perceive AI and its threats and benefits to their society? What sort of governance frameworks are needed to be able to enable the growth of responsible African AI ecosystems and safeguard against harms to individuals, groups, and communities? And lastly, what resources and capacity gaps must be filled? So what do we need in Africa to be able to undertake those risk assessments that I was talking about earlier? So what support is needed for the data protection regulators in Africa? What support do governments need? What support do businesses need? And how do we put that together as a package to enable the growth of responsible use of generative AI, which is a goal for most societies want responsible use of generative AI. So how do we actually achieve that goal? So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I will now hand back to the team in Accra, and I look forward to hearing some of the panel discussion. If you're interested in some of the articles I've written on generative AI, my newsletter is online, privacyx.substack.com, if you wish to find out some more information. But thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that very insightful presentation. We look forward to having you in person very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of part 1.5. We're going to take a coffee break, and then when we come back, we'll go into a panel discussion on generative AI and data protection in Africa. I'd like to request of Justice Jennifer Dadzi to along with the speakers here present and the board, to make your way up on the stage for a quick photo op as we break for coffee. Coffee break is only 15 minutes. We're going to stick to time because we know you're all very busy and we don't want to keep you here for too long. So coffee break now. Can I have the speakers here present and our special guest of honor make your way onto the stage for a quick photograph. If you're a speaker, you're speaking today or tomorrow, I want you to join. Please come up onto the stage. And coffee break starts now. The coffee break is right next door. There's an exhibition ongoing there as well. Margins are showing a wide range of their solutions for identity management. You can go and ask a few questions and maybe do a deal or two. And I'd like to urge you all to be protective of your personal belongings. Unfortunately, there are people who attend conferences and harvest properties that aren't theirs.
Hello, welcome to the second season of the Digital Rights Africa podcast, where we talk about everything on data governance, data protection and privacy, cybersecurity, and intellectual property issues in Africa.
more minutes for the resumption of the next session, please. 5 minutes. Please make your way back to your seats. We need to restart.
This year run away. I am my life, say me a galam say. My old day now be me away. Me de me yet to be chow kule. We ni beji and you check kule. Gabremo and you to be. Say me do kakra or fago pay. Pass na ya my mates no see away. Captain add what them a say.
Me I no want talk anything. Money they call me for my brain. Yamba kinchiki ya day. Na sayansu kungani. This time me I go the party. I decide kungani. Taking over we the show Ghana. Taking over we the go hard. Taking over we the show Ghana. Taking over we the go hard. Remember see me I tell you say Kaji kunya go be. Kato man kani be kaidwadi. What be your problem? A blanket. Kaptaiba Sunny, Wally Ronnie, Lady Keshani, Becke, one fee, Puno, Ife, Ayati, Kochai, Shata. utashi utrati. No, eba ke comfortable lead. Ipit ni shashish. Ya nenge ale benali. Ina buwe kwe mokobi. Shut wale. Moko taking over, we the sugar now. We taking over, we the go hard. We taking over, we the sugar now. We taking over, we the go hard. In a kojo gra bajo. In a kojo gra je bankuda de. Muhammad Ali bumuaye. Macho man.
Purchase your tracks today.
Welcome back, everyone. So we're going into part two proper, and I have the generative AI panel discussion. And I'd like to call on Mr. Saj Muhammad to take over. Welcome, your moderator, with a round of applause.
Purchase your tracks today.
My name is Saj
Purchase your tracks today. Virus be killing it. Purchase your tracks today.
Please welcome Ololade Echelon from Meta, who is our third panelist on stage today. Welcome, Ololade. I think we do have two more panelists online, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to confirm that they are actually online and connected. They're online? Okay, perfect. So we do have online Mrs. Dudeda Madrush, who is the Data Protection Commissioner of the Republic of Mauritius. And then we do have, from what I have here, we do have Darlington Akogo, who is founder and CEO of Mino Health, and an expert on AI for the ITU and WHO. I think we're good on the panelists. So let's get started. We do have roughly 1 hour for our panel. That's not a lot for experts in this field. That's roughly less than 10 minutes for each of you. So we aim to be brief and concise and just make sure that we know the audience can leave this panel with a sense of a bit of better understanding of where we are in terms of the AI policy in Africa, and especially generative AI and data protection. So let me just maybe start by a brief detailed introduction of our panelists. So I'll start with Dr. Aurora Deshlon, who is Head of Privacy Policy for Africa, Middle East, and Turkey at Meta. And she's a human rights lawyer.
No audio.
Well. And then moving to Matthew Martin, who is the founder, Two Candlesticks, who is a cybersecurity and strategic advisor as well. And then Jenna Franklin, who is a lawyer, and she's a senior corporate data protection and privacy specialist at Stephenson Howard. And I also noted that she co-chairs the Data Protection Finance Group, which is a UK network of more than 400 lawyers and privacy professionals. Okay, I hope I made a good introduction for you. Then let's get started. So maybe what I would do is quickly maybe just set the scene. We had a very good, I think, presentation from I think a key network. A keynote. Maybe what I can do is just give you a bit of a quick scenario just to get us going. There's been a lot of discussions about AI, a flurry of information over the last 12 months. And I think one of the things that we aim to do at the summit is unpack it a little bit for you. So we break it down and just get it to be relevant to our audience. So there's been a lot of conversation about large language models, ChatGPT, etc., and the impact, the potential impact, the risk, and the threats that we're seeing in terms of protection of personal data. That obviously creates some challenges. Some of them relating to data protection principles like transparency, fairness, lawful possession, consent, accuracy. Maybe just the first question I wanted to ask to you, and I'll start here on stage and then online as well, is based on what we're seeing in terms of the explosion of AI and issues around, potential issues around data protection. Do we believe that, or what do we see, how do we see the current framework of data protection in Africa? Do we see it adequate in terms of being able to address AI in Africa? I'll start with you, Dr. Olade, and then we'll probably move to our online speakers.
Thank you very much. So I think that in terms of the region, we obviously have lots of data protection laws. Not every country has a law. I believe that most of the laws, at least there are some core principles in data protection laws that...
I'm not sure we hear you very well.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Better now?
Is it better?
I'm not sure. Is it better? Yeah. There are core principles that exist in data protection laws that are obviously relevant and applicable to AI, right? You mentioned things like transparency and things like that. So by and large, there are. And our position is that it's best not to reinvent the wheel. Where you have principles that are applicable, use them. Where you find gaps, then try and find a way to address those gaps. So, so my short answer to that is maybe not 100%, but a lot of the key principles will apply across board.
You said you were the problem for Western region, right?
Yeah, so yes, a lot of the principles apply, but there are gaps that need to be addressed specifically. But adopting a risk-based approach to ensure that we have innovation and we don't stifle innovation. So that's my short answer to that.
Okay, thanks for that. Maybe just we have Mrs. Rudoisha Madoub. Welcome, Mrs. Rudoisha. Thanks for being with us. Do you hear us?
Yes, I do. I hope you hear me as well.
Perfect. Thanks. I'll turn to you, for the same question. Do you see the current framework being adequate to some extent to address some of the emerging challenges that we're seeing with generative AI?
I think the question is not about whether the African context is prepared or not for welcoming AI, because I think the world itself is not prepared as such to welcome AI with all its weaknesses. Definitely, the benefits are here. We're not going to speak about the benefits. They're numerous and they're good. But the weaknesses, definitely, the world is not prepared for the weaknesses that AI is bringing in terms of, compliance, not only data protection, intellectual
Recording in progress.
Intellectual property rights, and other aspects of laws that are being impacted, by AI. But definitely, when we speak about data protection, privacy, I think this is one of the most important areas where AI is actually having some big repercussions. But we shouldn't be worried in the sense that, laws, whether they're in some African countries, data protection laws do not exist as such for the time being, whereas in other parts of Africa, we do have laws, but laws which may not be adequate as well or appropriate as well, not only for AI, but all technologies involved. That is the scenario that we have in the African context. But I'm saying that we should not be worried. What we have to do at the African level has been done by the African Union. I think the framework that the African Union has put into place, that it calls the AU Data Policy Framework, I will come to that in the next session that I will be talking in details. But I think the important aspect of the AU Data Policy Framework is that it addresses many data protection concerns for the African context. But the problem with the framework is that it is a framework. It's not legally binding. And the laws that we have in many African countries on data protection have not reflected, what the AU Data Policy Framework is providing, because it's quite a modern and updated framework. Even the Malabo Convention is not addressing the issues that the Data Policy Framework has covered in a very ambitious and forward-looking manner for the whole African continent. It's a very good framework. But as I said, for it to be effectively implemented, we need, governments to start incorporating these guidelines, these principles that have been enunciated in this framework in their domestic jurisdictions. And that is not the case right now. So the problem and the challenge that we will be facing in terms not only for AI, but for data protection concerns in relation to technology as such, is that we are having weak implementation in domestic jurisdictions. But to be able to cure that, it's a big alignment of all political powers in Africa, which we need, and under the supervision of the African Union, to be able to, to meet, to cure all these weaknesses. But I have a small suggestion or recommendation. You see, in the big tech industry world, is that they are the ones having the power, the commercial, the economic power. They are influencing, domestic rules and regulations, all these aspects in terms of AI right now, because this is the current technology. But there's something that, governments and even in the African context, we are not doing. What we are not doing is that we are not paralleling the efforts, meeting the requirements that technology is bringing in our countries at the same level. What I mean to say is that, with the advent of AI technology, we should also be, coming up with rules and regulations, let's say licensing requirements for AI developers, even AI deployers to some extent, where actually, we introduce control mechanisms which are going to see the viability of these tools that are being offered at the international level, whether they meet our requirements in terms of customization. And this we're not doing in the African context. So this aspect, even I think other countries are not doing, right? So we have US, we have China, like the ones who are, creating these technologies, but there is no clearance process, even internationally, that is saying that these products are actually safe, or they are actually, meeting the privacy-enhancing technologies aspect. We don't have any as such. What we have is the data protection authorities, after seeing the side effects of these already deployed technologies, finding and sanctioning these AI developments. But this is at the, after the creation of these technologies, not before the creation of these technologies. That is, there is no such clearing process which is making these products tested and like viable or customized even for the African context. I think that the African Union should consider developing these clear rules and guidelines for AI and even licensing requirements so that Africa does not become a dumping ground for these technologies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Maddob. I think it's very clear from your perspective as a regulator that you are a strong proponent of proactive approaches to regulation and just making sure that there is enough customization, and then we're not just consumers of these technology and the policies that are being enacted elsewhere. Look, this is actually a good opportunity for me, maybe just to help us to look at what's happening in other jurisdictions. I think Matthew and Gina. Matthew, you recently wrote an article, I think it was a few days ago, about the fact that legislation around emerging technologies like AI could be very obsolete if there is sort of a top-down approach to it. So you were more advocating for like flexible approaches to it. Will you maybe just sort of tell us a bit about that in terms of what do you think in terms of that flexible approach, how can it be very useful, and maybe just how can it be relevant to the African continent?
Yeah, so thank you to everybody for being here and allowing me to be here. Let me just start with, when we think about generative AI, one of the biggest problems we have right now is nobody